Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class, Abstract Studies in Gouache and Mixed Media. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and tonight's class is just a one-off class on abstract studies, but I will be referencing some other classes that I have taught for Michael's that talk about the same subject, and also another class that is the inspiration for the way that I like to do abstract studies. So our moderator, Rich, has links that he can drop in the chat so you can find those classes on YouTube. And then if you're watching later, watching the playback of this class on YouTube, then we'll say the titles of those classes so that you can refer back to them. And next week's class is going to be on drawing teeth, which I'm very excited about. I mentioned at the end of last week's class that the drawing teeth class is has a little trick about drawing teeth that I'm not going to say, so you can sign up for it to find out. But teeth are a very challenging subject matter for a lot of folks, and it's kind of like hands. Like, we tend to want to draw someone whose hands are in their pockets, so we just don't have to draw the hands, right? Or when it comes to faces, let's just do a closed mouth smile, please, because those teeth are so challenging to draw. So I'm going to help demystify that for you and give you some fun, easy tricks to follow to draw teeth, so you will not be scared to draw teeth anymore after next week. All right, I'm going to switch to my tabletop view and go over our supplies, and we'll get started here. Don't forget to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michael's or Michael's Classes, and you can follow me on Instagram at 80hodge. And here are a couple of my business cards with some of my work. I'm also on Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Art, and I have some independent classes that I am teaching, not through Michael's, that you can check out, online classes through my link tree. And if you just search my name in link tree, it should come up if you're watching later. And Rich has that link he can drop in the chat as well for you now. Okay, so we are using Artist Loft gouache. I'm using this jelly gouache here. I've got some Artist Loft watercolor paint brushes. I've got some Artist Loft watercolor paper here that I've already taken out of the little packaging there. And I've got some tape. I just realized I need to maybe go grab a couple of paper towels. I should have a couple of paper towels here. And then I have a couple of water cups. And I think I see some paper towels across the room. I forgot my fancier shop towels today, but that's what we will need for tonight. You may want to tape your paper down, mostly just so that it doesn't buckle too much, or you can keep it, you don't have to tape it down. So that's optional. But let's see. And then you might want some separate palettes to mix up your gouache. So some little plastic palettes like this that I got at Michael's would be good, or one that has the 10 wells inside of it. And then I also have this ceramic plate I might be using over here that'll imitate what we might do with one of those little plastic palettes. And I think, oh, and then you should have some pencils or charcoal. It's up to you, or maybe some pens. And that'll be the mixed media aspect that we'll be adding. So to this example, I added some graphite. So I've got some graphite pencils here, and I think I'll probably stick to that just to keep it simple for myself. Okay, if there are no questions about supplies, I'm going to move some of this out of the way and get started talking about my abstract formula here. Okay, so I'm going to be referring back to a class called Abstract Studies from, I believe, well, it doesn't matter when it was, but it was August, a couple years ago, I believe. And we used, or maybe even last summer, and we used markers for these abstract studies. And we had some examples that looked something like this, and then that led into a premium class. Michael's used to do these premium classes that were had a small fee to sign up for them, and so only a limited number of people attended the premium class, where we used squeeze pouches of abstract sennelier, abstract paint, acrylic paint, to create some an abstract work of art, and everybody followed along. Anyway, so tonight we're going to be using gouache and mixed media, but we're going to be doing the same ideas that I talked about in that abstract studies class. And so I'm just going to go over that here real quick. And all of this is on YouTube in the class titled Abstract Studies, where we used markers. So you should be able to find that on YouTube. If you just search Abstract Studies and my name, it should come right up. Okay, so my little abstract formula here is based on landscapes. It's based on the idea of atmospheric perspective and creating 3 dimensions and depth in a landscape. So first of all, I'm going to actually refer back to another class that I did even longer ago. This one was definitely a couple years ago, on landscape studies in graphite. And you can find that one by searching that link or searching on YouTube, landscape studies and my name, and it should come up. Okay, so in that class, I went very in depth and talked about atmospheric perspective and creating a clear separation between foreground, middle ground, and background, and what are the aspects of atmospheric perspective that we need to see in order to create those things. So one thing is overlapping. So things that are in the foreground are overlapping the background, or sorry, the middle ground. And then things in the middle ground are overlapping the background. And then you might have an object, we have this right here is the foreground in this sketch, but then there might be something coming into the frame that's even closer or still as close, like a tree branch or a little piece of a plant. Like in this example, there's a little bit of a tree branch overlapping, coming even more into the foreground there. Okay, so that's the idea of atmospheric perspective and having a clear separation between foreground, middle ground, and background. We also have things diminishing in size. So the objects that are getting farther to the horizon are going to get smaller. So even clouds in the sky will appear to get smaller as they go towards the horizon line. Trees will appear smaller. And again, we'll have that overlapping. And then the other thing that I talked about in this landscape study was the rule of thirds. So that's where we take a rectangle and we divide it on the horizontal and the vertical axis, so that we get these lines of separation here. And then where these points intersect is where you try to align areas of interest. So that's the main idea about the rule of thirds that I want to mention. And was there?
Adrian, really quick question, and I could probably answer it, but I'm sure you can do it more concisely. What's the difference between using gouache and watercolor, just for a few of the new folks today?
So gouache is opaque watercolor. And you could definitely do this class with watercolor if that's what you have. So you don't have to have gouache, but there are a few things that we can do with gouache that we can't necessarily do with watercolor. And that is get it to be nice and thick and texturized like this. So that's why I wanted to use gouache for these abstract studies, because I really wanted to push texture as we get into it a little further today. I'll be talking a lot about texture. But yeah, gouache is just opaque watercolor. Actually, I dropped that paintbrush, so I was just picking it up. had a class about a few months back where we used watercolor, gouache, and ink. And I talked about the three of those and how they are similar and how they are different. That should be on that playlist, or you can search it on YouTube, watercolor, gouache, and ink, and my name, and it should come up. And gouache is spelled go you ache. That's how I like to remember how to spell it. Go you ache. It's maybe an unusual spelling for some folks. Okay, so back to talking about atmospheric perspective here. So those were the main points that I wanted to make. I was about to move on from this, but I just wanted to mention the one other aspect of this sketch that I'm not talking about is the directional flow of the elevation, which could help as we progress through the class today as far as trying to create three-dimensional forms with the abstract colors that we're going to be using. That's something that sometimes people who try to deviate from my example and do their own thing often struggle in this lesson to get away from making things look really flat and more two-dimensional. So the easiest way to stay away from that would be to think more in terms of 3 dimensions. So here I've sketched out like the elevational shift on these mountains and the elevational shift on this little pond bank, the banks of this pond here. And as we're adding more abstract forms later, we could still think in terms of creating more of a mass with the colors and not just a flat area of color. So like right here, it maybe feels a little more 3 dimensional in some ways. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say about landscape study. So having said all that and reviewed all these things about landscape studies, now when we take a look at my little abstract formula here, maybe some of this will make more sense. So I've got my little rectangles that I sketched, one in portrait and one in landscape, and then I divided it into thirds and I put the points of intersection there. And so my formula here is just 4 steps. So it's basically your background, your middle ground, and your foreground. And then step 4 is going to be some kind of wild card or some kind of unexpected thing. So, and with all of these shapes and forms, we're following the rules of thirds and we're thinking about this idea of landscape. So in the background, we've got bigger shapes and they don't necessarily have to be lighter, but in these examples that I did that day in the last class that I referenced on abstract studies, I did use lighter shapes in the background with the markers. And then I overlapped with something related that was interacting with the background. So here I overlapped this bigger, lighter green shape with this smaller green shape, and it's interacting in that they're both green. And then in the foreground, I'm trying to really create some depth. So just like that branch coming into the scene is creating depth because it's making a clear separation with the middle ground and the background. We're trying to put something in the foreground that creates some depth. So like right here, it's this shape or form here in brown it feels, and it maybe feels a little landscapey, like some sort of organic rock formation. Or here I used this dark blue to create all these vertical lines that also create some separation. And you can definitely see the influence of organic landscape-like organic things in these examples here. And then, so in the foreground, we've got something that's far away from the background. It's closer to the viewer and it's contrasting in color or shape. So if you used lighter colors or bright colors in the background and middle ground, then you want to use something that's opposite and contrasting that in the foreground. So with this one, I've got this blue and this brown in the background. And then I've got this overlapping of this gold that seems to be interacting with the brown and the blue. And then in the foreground, I've got this swirly line. And then, so that creates some depth and some separation. And then step 4 is that wild card. Okay, so it's something unexpected, and that could be unexpected in shape, line, texture. Texture could be a big one, or the color could be unexpected. So with this one, I added this pink color, this pastel pink. And I also did the gold in these little floating rectangular brushstroke shapes. And then I also, added the texture of the pencil. So the pencil could also create that separation. And then in this class with the markers, I brainstormed some other doodles. So y'all are welcome to call out some other doodles to me now. I'm going to actually flip to a blank page and we can come up with some more ourselves that could maybe be a little different here. So in this class, I talked about maybe some little crescent moon shapes. This shape is one I use a lot that feels like a city in space. It's very sci-fi-esque, or it could be like a rock formation, maybe some little bubbles, maybe some floating clouds, or some little floaty dots that feel like little bubbles or little sparkles or little fairy dust stars. And then I've got my floating rectangles, and these are all ones that I use in my personal artwork quite a bit. So if you do copy my example kind of directly here, just make sure you tag me on Instagram if you share that out, or wherever you share it, Adrian Hodge Fine Art on Facebook, or AD Hodge on Instagram, so that you can give me credit, since this is a lot of my personal abstract style that I'm sharing here. But I'm not the only one who uses shapes and forms like this, and definitely a nice textured scribble is something that shows up in a lot of abstract work. And then some others that we added from this class that people chimed in and added in the chat were like a brick pattern maybe, or some overlapping circles like that. So I'm going to flip to a blank page here in the sketchbook. And if y'all want to share out some in the chat, maybe some other doodles, any other ideas for doodles that we might include in our abstract studies tonight that could be unexpected or like a wild card. Okay, Sarah is saying triangles, so maybe some floating, repeating triangles. I'm also a big fan of layering triangles like this to make some sort of amplituhedron type shape. So that could be a cool one. I saw Tanya, I believe, said lines. So maybe some wavy lines, or some straight lines, or some vertical lines, some sort of repeating lines. Ginger says a footprint. That could be cool. Maybe a little footprint like that, or like a paw print maybe. Could be fun. Fishes, a half a butterfly wing. Oh, that's a good one. Let's do a little butterfly wing here. I like that it's just a half a butterfly wing as well. That's fun. Okay, maybe a butterfly wing. Let's see. Let me pull the chat open here. They stop popping up. A paisley pattern, a teardrop. Okay, that's a good one. Oh, excuse me. Hexagons, Barbara said. Small spirals, swirls, waves. Ooh, slime. Leaves. These are also good. Some of these, and you can definitely look at a picture of, thank you, Deb, You can, and Ginger typed, bless you. I sneezed a couple times. Um, you can definitely look at a reference photo. There are no rules about if this is abstract enough, right? If you put something recognizable in your abstract study, I don't think you're breaking the rules of abstract work. So some of these, I'm like, I need to look at a picture of a leaf or a paisley or a fish. It's hard for me. I'm very literal. I need to look at a reference. So some of these I can't necessarily draw the doodle off the top of my head. But yeah, maybe some zigzag lines, like a lightning bolt, is one. Okay, these are all really great. So keep brainstorming your ideas like that, because having notes like that are very helpful. And then I'm going to throw out another inspirational idea for you. And then I'm going to show you a bunch of examples of some other abstract work in gouache that I have here on my desk. And then we'll get started doing these together. But I feel like I'm referencing so many other Michael's classes tonight, but a while back we did these king trumpet mushroom paintings and we used gouache, and these were the colors that we used to do the king trumpet paintings. And this was my example from before the class, and this was my example during the class. Didn't quite get it to the same level of completion there. But when the class was over that night, I still had all of those colors on my palette. And so I decided to play around and make a little bit of an abstract work that night. And these were some of the textures or lines or shapes or forms that I was doodling off to the side to brainstorm, like what else would go with it. Because I'll say this as we get into it here, you don't want to work too fast with this process because you can easily overwork an abstract piece and take it from a point of being fairly happy with it to the point that it's just overworked and you're not happy with it anymore. So when you get to that point where you don't know what to do next, sometimes it can be nice to do a little brainstorming off to the side and see what other elements might I add that could bring this together. And so I did my little scribble and the little crescent and the swirlies, and I was pretty happy with that. So I decided to add those things. But I definitely spent some time being thoughtful about how I might continue building up this little abstract study in my sketchbook. So that's worth noting as we get into color choice here. Some of you may want to just go with the same colors that I'm using today, which I'm going to stick to this color palette to keep it pretty simple for myself. I might go a little bit outside of that, but I think I'm going to stick with that one because I feel like this is a successful palette that I want to stick with from the example. But maybe you have another piece that you've recently worked on, or you have a color palette that speaks to you, or you maybe still have some gouache left over from our pet portrait class a few weeks ago in December, and you could pull those out because gouache can be reconstituted. So we can continue to use those colors even if they've dried up on the palette. So that's one idea about how to choose colors here. But the next thing I'm going to do is have us talk about how you might choose colors on your own. Okay, so after we've brainstormed some different lines, colors, shapes, and forms, and in addition to these, you could go bigger with your shapes too. Like I want to have a bunch of overlapping big circles, or maybe I want to have some overlapping big rectangular shapes because that's what I did here. Or perhaps it's overlapping lines as well. So maybe brainstorm some bigger shapes as well for yourself. Okay, so let's talk about our color scheme. I recommend that you choose color scheme. I recommend that you choose two colors that you like and that you know go well together. So some easy choices would be two primary colors. And the reason for two primary colors is that when we mix those two primary colors together, we're going to end up with a secondary color, right? If we mix red and blue, we're going to get violet. If we mix yellow and red, we're going to get orange. And if we mix yellow and blue, we're going to get green. So we're less likely to turn our painting into some kind of mud if we choose primary colors. One moment here, I'm just going to turn off my AC. Was a little hot and now I'm freezing myself out here. Also making my coffee get cold too fast. Okay, so we've got two primary colors we'll mix together to give us a third secondary color if they mix together at some point on our palette or in the painting. So that could be one idea for a color scheme. Another idea could be two complementary colors. And it's complement with an E, not with an I. So they're opposite on the color wheel. So that would be orange and blue, red and green, or yellow and violet. But if you do this, I recommend that you subdue or mute one of these colors. So rather than using your brightest orange, I would use kind of a muted orange or a muted red or a muted yellow so that it's not quite so overpowering. So you might start with the two complementary colors and then add a neutral color like brown or gray. So that might be a nice color scheme as well. Or it could just be two colors that you love that you know go well together. So for me, that is usually brown and blue because I am big on sepia brown in a lot of my work, and then blue. I've done a lot of monochromatic blue work and a lot of monochromatic sepia work. If you check out my work on my website and Instagram, you can see that. Oh, I see. I started a conversation about the weather. It's 5 degrees there, Ginger said. Yeah, it warmed up a bit today and I put on this sweater, so I turned on my AC because I was just a little warm. Okay, so yeah, two colors that you love. So think like the colors that you decorate your living room with. And whenever I ask that question in an in-person class, it's always so funny how I'll go around the room and ask what colors, and oftentimes the straight men in the class have no idea what color their couch and their throw pillows are. I'll go around and say, everybody tell me what your color scheme is on your couch and your throw pillows. And then everybody can tell me except for the straight men. They're like, I cannot tell you what the throw pillows and what the couch colors are. And I always think that's hilarious. Anyway, so maybe think of how you like my couch is like a red floral pattern, and then I have yellow, like gold yellow pillows on it. But the red is definitely more of like a rusty red. So it's like rust and then gold yellow, right? So those might be two colors. And then if you're going with a color scheme like that, then you definitely want to match those colors. You want to try to make a specific match to a color and try not to go with just the basic flat rainbow colors. You know, we're trying to get a little more interesting with our color choices here. And this Artist Loft set here of the jelly gouache actually has several really nice, interesting colors in it, like this earth yellow and this ochre color and this deep red. So there's already some nice colors in here that are maybe outside of the classic rainbow colors. And so yeah, that's what I want you to do is settle on your color scheme, and then we're going to mix up our colors and get ready to paint here next. But before we do that, I just want to show you some other examples and talk about my last trick here. So I'll just review all my tricks so far. So it's using the atmospheric perspective, uh, thinking about a landscape, foreground, middle ground, and background, and then some kind of wild card. And your wild card could be an unexpected shape, line, color, texture, form, basically just listing out a lot of the art elements here. The only one I'm missing is space. Space and what else am I missing? There's 7 of them. Anyway, something unexpected. So shape, line, color, texture, form. And then the other trick is choosing a color scheme that is limited so that we don't turn our painting into mud. Although sometimes using all of the colors of the rainbow can yield good results, but in my experience, for beginners with abstract work, it's better to choose a limited color scheme and to make a specific match, make a conscious choice about the colors that you're using and maybe mute them a little bit or make a color that's a little bit outside of the unexpected when we think of red, yellow, blue, etc. So just make some kind of interesting choice with the colors. And then the last thing was the last trick is, sorry, I've had a little brain fart there for a second. The last trick is to not put all your eggs in one basket. And we're going to work on multiple things at once. So I'm about to clear all of this off of my desk and I'm going to mix up the colors that I'm using here in this abstract piece. But then I'm going to lay out about 3 or 4, probably just 3, because that's what I can fit under my camera. But I advise that you maybe pull out more than 3 pieces of paper. The more, the merrier. So maybe even 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, depending on how much space you have at your workstation, because the more options you give yourself in this process, the more successful you are likely to be. If you just do one example, you are very likely to overwork that example. So I'm going to show you some examples here from some other gouache abstract studies classes I have done. These are kind of the cream of the crop or the best ones from when I laid out 5 or 6 pieces of paper at a time, or maybe more. So I recall on this day, I had like 4 or 5 sheets of paper, and out of all of the examples I did that day, these 2 I was really happy with. So I've got that one, and then I've got this one, which has a very Disney fairy tale feel to it, but then I added this black texture with the gouache. And then this one, that pastel orange was definitely the wild card that I added there. But I had 3 or 4 other examples from this day that I'm not showing you because I was not happy with them. And then from this abstract studies day, let me clear out some of these other examples so we can just focus on these one at a time. There were maybe 3 or 4 other ones from this day, but I really liked these 2. And so those were the 2 that I saved from the other abstract abstract studies I did that day, and these were pretty minimal and they can go all different directions. So, but you can see some patterns emerging in some of my lines and shapes and textures and forms that I'm using there, but I'm definitely playing around with some different colors on some of these. This one I did on the same day as the main example that I'm working from today, but I liked the other one better. But you can see I used the same colors and the same pencil as the texture there. And I have a few more. This one is very minimal. I might add to this one. It's just that. And then I recall this one was one of two from a day where I had about 5 or 6 pieces of paper out, and this one was also the one that I touched the least. So sometimes I give myself permission to overwork one of them, which I will do here tonight as well. But then the one that I use restraint with tends to be the one that I like the most. So that's the last trick here. Oh, and then this one was also from that same day. I kind of like how a little cityscape started to emerge out of this one. Okay, so that is my little show and tell. I teach a in-person gouache class, and on the last day of that gouache class here in Austin, at the Contemporary Austin, where I've been teaching lately, doing that gouache class, I do abstract studies on the last class day, and that's usually do some examples myself, and I always encourage people to pull out at least 3, if not more, pieces of paper to prepare to do these abstract studies. And then we're also I'm going to leave one piece of paper off to the side here to prepare my palette. So I'm going to go ahead and tape these down, mostly just so they don't buckle. And I advise that you do the same thing. It might be a little wasteful or feel a little wasteful with the tape, but you can also peel the tape off and get a clean edge if you do this, and that could really elevate your abstract work. If you end up accidentally overworking all of them, then it's nice to have that little clean edge. So to go back to like that example, you can see how I peeled off the tape and had a clean edge all the way around. Just gonna tape these down on all 4 sides. And even if I don't go all the way to the edge of the tape, it's still going to help me visualize a frame, and it's going to keep the paper from buckling because we're going to use light washes in the early stages of this and then build up to thicker paint. And I've had a number of classes on gouache with Michaels that you can refer back to. I've been teaching these classes for 3.5 years now, so I have a lot of classes on YouTube that you can search. But I know like last year in January, we did a Gouache 101 class where I talked about the basics of gouache and different brush strokes. And that one could also be really beneficial and helpful for what we're doing tonight if you are just looking for more brainstorming ideas about different techniques and textures that you can get with the gouache. Abstract work is one of those things that my favorite quote about, it's usually, I think the meme says modern art, like modern art equals, I could do that, plus, yeah, but you didn't. And the reaction that I often get from people when I do this lesson in person is that, yeah, they thought abstract work looked so easy, like a kindergartner could do it or anybody could do it, but then they realize there's actually a lot more that goes into creating abstract work than they realized. And it does take a trained eye and some practice. So don't be hard on yourself or compare yourself to my example if you're trying to do your own thing and your vision or your idea doesn't quite pan out the way you expect it to. And you are welcome to copy my example just for the sake of having a product that you're satisfied with today, and just to be a little bit more absent-minded about what you're doing and to not have to think about it too much. But I always want these classes to feel like I'm empowering students to create their own work or something that feels more original. All right, I'm almost done taping this down, but
Adrian, what size paper are you using, and did you cut it down?
I believe, no, I did not cut it down. I believe it is 6x9 artist loft paper or but yeah, any size that you have is fine. You might cut it down if you an easy way to cut the paper if you don't have a paper cutter is to here, I'll just do it with this piece, and this will actually maybe be better for my palette. If you fold it in half, this is pretty old school here. Maybe remember doing this in middle school or high school, just like get it a nice crease if you happen to have a oh my gosh, for bookbinding, a little paper folder that might help as well. And then I'm just gonna fold it back and forth on that same edge a few times to get the crease to really happen in that piece of paper. And then I might even lick it with my tongue on either side to get it like even softer right there, and then flip it back and forth a few more times, and then it should rip just right on that line and give you a nice little deckled edge. And then you can have some paper that's got a little rough edge on it that also looks nice for an abstract study. So if you want to tear your paper down and make it smaller and you don't have a paper cutter, that's an option here. Okay, I know we are pretty far into the class here and we're like, we haven't painted yet, but this really is one of those processes that goes so fast. And if we don't talk about all these elements first, then it's easy to just overwork it and get lost in the sauce. Okay, I need to grab a paper towel for myself real quick. Okay, so now we're ready to get our colors going here. And I said to keep it really simple, I'm just going to use blue and brown and gold, just like in my main example here. And then my wild card color is going to be a pastel pink. So I'm going to keep that there for myself. And also have a little spray bottle, or maybe you might use a pipette to just drop some color, or sorry, drop some water into your colors to moisten them. Spritzing of colors to moisten them. And then I'm gonna use my eyedropper. You can just take your water cup or your paintbrush and dip your paintbrush in your water cup and then keep dropping it into your palette until you get a little puddle of water. And then I'm going to take my two colors, my main two colors here, brown and blue, and make a little wash of both of them. So I'm doing that before my water cups get too dirty, so I can just have a wash version of both of my colors that I'm using. And if you want to do your own thing and use different colors, you're welcome to, or you're welcome to just do the same thing I'm doing. All right, so I made a wash of my blue. And this is, let's see, ultramarine blue. This little sheet sometimes confuses me. I'm like, that doesn't really match up with the ultramarine blue. Actually, this is the acid blue in this set. It looks a little different in the palette versus on that little picture there. Okay, and then I'm going to use my burnt umber, so my really dark brown. And maybe I might touch my ochre brown and add that to it just to like tone it down slightly a little bit, make it a little more chocolatey brown. Okay, so I've got a wash of these two colors. I'm gonna paint a little swatch of my colors so I can have a little idea of my palette. So I painted it directly, a little more directly, and then I'll paint a little swatch of the wash just so I can see the difference between the watered down version of it and the thicker version of it. And then I'll paint a little swatch of my blue. More directly. And then I'll paint a swatch of the watered down blue. And yeah, that's good. And then I also used this medium yellow color, though I always want to call this ochre. And I used that pretty directly. I didn't use a wash of that, but if you wanted to make a wash of this one as well, you're welcome to. And then I need the pastel pink. So my two main colors here are my blue and brown, because I use blue and brown in a lot of my artwork. And then my neutral color that I added was this more neutral brownish gold color. I mean, we could say that the brown that I'm using is also neutral, obviously. And then this pastel pink. So the white is definitely the color that I tend to use the most in this gouache set for mixing. And in that pet portrait for my cat recently, she's got a lot of white long hair fur. So I used a lot of white. But let me get some of my white here, and then I'm gonna add some rosy red to it to make a pink. But first I gotta really smash into this white and break it up. It's a little solidified. Just gonna get a big chunk of it here because I want to use my pink more directly as well. So you're definitely probably seeing what I mean about the gouache being like opaque watercolor. We can water it down and we can make it more like watercolor, or we can use it more directly and it behaves a little more like ink. So it's right there in the middle of this spectrum from watercolor to ink. Gouache would be right in the middle. And that's a little darker pink than what I used before. So I'm gonna clean my brush again. You always want to start with the lighter color first when you're mixing and then slowly add the darker color. Right now, if I were to just start with the red and then add the white, the red would dominate it. So I have to clean my brush, get a little more white, and then slowly add that pink I already have to it so that it can try to get it to be a light pink. So that's looking pretty good. Right. And a little swatch of that pink. Another thing about gouache that I've mentioned in all of the gouache classes before, but it's worth repeating, is that it does this very tricky thing. When it's wet, it looks so much different than when it's dry, like a lot of water media. But when it dries, the darker values can dry lighter, and the lighter values can dry darker. And if that is just like, wait, what? I know that's so confusing. I even have to stop and think about it before I say it. So if that really bothers you and you can't wrap your head around it, the number one thing to do, which you want to do anyway, is just wait for your layers to dry before you judge what's happening. Okay, so we've got our little palette here and we're ready to start painting. And the number one thing with gouache and any water media is you want to let your layers dry before you move on. So we're going to start with our washes because those are going to dry the fastest, although they're still wet here on this piece of paper. Just realized I'm not really using my big palette. All I really need is these little ones since I'm just using these few colors.
Adrian, quick question. One of our artists is wondering, for example, would it be okay to do maybe two primary colors, a neutral color, and a wild card color?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that would be great. I just recommend keeping it pretty limited. So yeah, just 3 or 4 colors. Because these colors might mix together and then you might end up with something that feels a little muddy if you go too crazy with your color choices. Okay, so like I said before, I'm going to keep it super simple. I'm going to kind of follow my formula and I'm going to do a variation of what I did here in all 3 of these. And I'm going to try not to overwork any of them, but it is good to experiment and to let yourself overwork things. So if you feel like you just have the urge to keep adding to one of them, designate one of them like this is the one I'm going to give myself the freedom to do whatever I feel like on that one and let yourself explore as much as possible with one of them, but then we'll try to use a little more restraint on the other two and see what happens. All right, so I'm going to start with my wash of my brown. And I'm going to paint some nice big bulbous shapes. So I'm just taking my brown wash and going back and forth, swirling it down, trying to make a nice big rounded shape. And I'm going to do that on all 3 of them. I'm going to start a little bit differently with all of them. And I'm following the rule of thirds. So notice how I put that one in the top left, or I mean, the top left out of the 3 of them, but I put it in the top area of thirds, this one in the bottom or the middle area of thirds, and then this one I'm going to put in the bottom area of thirds. And I'm kind of doing a little flat wash here, which we did in the Gouache 101 class. If you're not familiar with how to create a nice flat wash, I'm just filling in that shape and then I'm stopping. So I'm not continuing to brush over it with my paintbrush and work into it. I'm just leaving it alone. Okay. And then I'm cleaning my brush and I'm going to go to my blue now, my blue wash. And this time I'm going to do more of like stripes with it so that I end up with a shape that's slightly different than the top shape. Maybe it might feel like water, and maybe I might let it be a little broken. I'm really using restraint with all of these. I'm not continuing to add too much to it with any of them. So this one, I'm going to do the top thirds again, but I'm going to make it a little bigger and I'm going to let it kind of trail off on the right side and maybe let it fill up 2/3 this time. And let it be nice and uneven on the sides. Okay, and then now we want to let things dry. So right now, if we continue to add to the whole thing, then we could easily lose some lovely quality that could be happening with these right now if we just let them dry on their own, right? I love to use the analogy of children because I'm a parent. I have an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old, and oftentimes as parents, we want to not control, but we want our kid, we have this idea of how we think our kids are going to act and talk and behave and all this stuff. And so we want to kind of put our ideals of how we want them to be on them sometimes. And it can be really hard as a parent to just let our kids be who they are, right? But that's what we all say we want to do. So, anyway, with water media, that's my go-to analogy is we can continue to act upon it and we can continue to try to make it do something, or we can just sit back and respect the way that it is going to naturally behave on its own. Because right now it's drying in a lot of places and it is collecting and pooling in some places. Things are starting to happen on their own that I don't need to do anything to it. And if I continue to do something to it, I'm going to take away what is naturally happening, right? I'm going to be controlling it in some way, and it's going to lose the quality that it's going to have if I just leave it alone. So a lot of what you do in abstract work is about what you don't do. So controlling ourselves more than controlling the materials. So we're kind of sitting back and we're waiting for it to dry, because you can see how I did that here. And maybe now that it's starting to dry a little bit, we could do a little bit of this. So we're going to add a little bit more direct paint to some of the edge of the shapes that are happening. But maybe, notice the parts of it that are looking kind of cool on their own right now, and leave those areas alone. So, and I'm really liking what's happening with these so far. So I'm going to be very restrained in what I add with the more direct brown. So I'm taking my direct brown on my paintbrush, just loading my brush up with some more direct brown, and maybe I could even put it in my little palette here and touch the water a little bit to get it somewhere in between direct and a wash. And then let's see, maybe I'll add an overlapping shape here or there. But again, using restraint. Or if it was kind of puddling or pooling in some places, you could add some more direct paint right there and let it bleed a little bit. And this is what I was saying from the Gouache 101 class. We played around with a lot of different techniques, brush strokes that you can do with the gouache that make interesting textures. And so that's something you might refer back to get some ideas. But this is definitely something that would be a little trickier with watercolor because the gouache is so thick and opaque. Okay, so that's interesting what I just added there. And I'm going to do the same thing with my direct blue, but taking a moment to step back and let it dry a bit before you do the next thing is important and is key because you can see what aspects of this you might want to save. I'm kind of stippling in, like just dropping it in. I'm not necessarily making my paintbrush go over and over this area. I'm just letting it kind of bleed naturally into it. And I really like this moment right here, so I don't want to mess with that too much. Just gonna add a little bit over here in the corner. And then right here, it's still wet right here. I'm gonna really add some thick texture here and let that bleed. All right. And you're seeing what I mean about restraint here, because as we do that, like cool stuff is happening. And oh my gosh, when I'm working by myself, it's so hard not to just continue to do stuff and just add more and more and more. And then it starts out being really cool. And I'm like, oh, let me just add a little bit more, a little bit more. And then I'm like, oh no, I went too far, right? So you have to be careful. There's a very thin line that you don't want to cross over. All right, let's get this third color in here, this medium yellow. I'm going to, and if you're using your own color scheme, then now would be a good time to start bringing in that third color. Thank you, Rich, for quoting me. I saw that. Okay. So this is where I think I'm going to add a nice little circle, because that seemed to work in that other example. So I'm thinking about where the point where those lines of thirds would intersect, right? So I'm gonna add that circle in a different spot in each one, but around the point where that line of thirds would intersect on the horizontal and vertical axis. Okay. And I feel like I need something right here in this one, so maybe I'll add a little bit more of the blue. The blue or the brown would be good, but I'm gonna add the blue right here. Maybe I'll do both. Maybe I'll add some blue and then add the brown too and let them bleed together a little bit. But I'm gonna be restrained in how I'm doing that so I don't overwork it. Okay. And then maybe add a little texture here. More direct. So gouache is just so fun for this because the way you can get that like inky bleed to happen is just so cool. Okay, and then another thing that I did to kind of fill these out was I added some of the ochre color and kind of added some thin lines on top of here. And I also added that blue swirly line. So I'm gonna take my skinny brush here, my liner brush, and add a little bit of that. This is what I mean about adding like a little more details in the foreground that starts to create that separation, right? We're starting to have some overlapping, kind of take that dark brown and drag it out. The same thing over here. I have to say, I do not take my own advice very often when I do this. It's been a while since I have used such restraint on a series of these. And I'm like, these are looking great. I might see these in my online shop one day soon. Okay, let's see. Oh, I did a little more of that in this other one. So into the blue as well, I did some of those. I love the way this medium yellow looks against the blue too. It reminds me of my little mat board here. It's got this kind of, it's not orange, but it's yellow. It's like a gold yellow on top of this blue. That definitely inspired me one day. I was like, I'm just going to match the colors that I'm seeing on this mat board. So I'm kind of starting outside of that field of color and then overlapping into it. And you can see how that's just really starting to fill out some of these shapes and make them feel less, makes them feel less far away too. It connects, starts to connect them all. Okay. And then that swirly blue line, but I did that in more of a wash of blue. And you definitely want most of this to be dry before you do this. And I'm going to start in a spot that's already pretty wet. And I might be making this look easier than it is because I do that a lot. So you might want to practice that off to the side of on a piece of scrap paper a little bit. I'm just loading up my brush and then just dragging it and swirling it around. And I'm trying to change the weight of the line as I swirl it. And I started in a wet moment so that it wasn't too, so it didn't just kind of come out of nowhere. I started it right there. Oops. Another one that can be fun is to load up your brush with this liner brush with a darker color like this. And then this is going to be pretty random, but I'm just going to tap it and let some little splatters happen. So that could be another little wild card. And then if there's a really wet splatter, you could start in the wet splatter and drag that around. And do something like that. Okay, I'm gonna not do it on this third one. Well, I don't know, maybe I should since I did it on the other two. Make it more minimal on this one. Okay, so yeah, it's really starting to come together a little bit here. So, and then as we're getting more detailed, we're also leaving things, the big stuff alone, right? We're letting the big stuff dry. I'm seeing Carol saying, yes, seeing and doing two different things. Yeah, the only thing I can't teach you is restraint. Oh, somebody's saying, can we see the bottom portion? I don't think I cut off too much there, but I guess I scooted it off up a little bit. Okay. Is everything visible? I feel like I can see it all on my screen. Let me scoot it a little more. All right. How are we doing on time? We're perfect. Okay. So now I want to do this wild card color, but I really want all of this to be a little more dry so that I can overlap a little more, but I guess I'll just add it in some places where it's not wet. But ideally, you really would want to wait for the whole thing to dry. So I'm just thinking y'all's might be wetter than mine too. Um, but it definitely is best when everything is completely dry because then you can just assess where it's at and it's not going to bleed too much and it'll really create that separation. So I'm just going to pull out some of these other examples here and point to how that makes such a difference. Like when I added this black, you can see the moments where it was still wet and how it bled into it. And then it just added more of like, this bleedy, dull situation. But then here, where this area was dry, I got this really rich, interesting texture to happen with those swirls. And when I splattered it, the dots where the rest of the painting was dry, they really stand out. But in the spot where it was wet, it bled. So it's just going to do a different thing if it's wet versus dry. And here's the same example or same sort of example. So when I added the wild card color of that pastel orange, here where it bled, it didn't have the same sort of effect as when I added it to the spot that was dry. So I know that's hard. And if you happen to have a blow dryer, maybe it would be a good idea to use a blow dryer if yours is super wet. But then if you use the blow dryer, you might have some really fun little puddles that are naturally drying on their own. And if you use the blow dryer, you could push those puddles around and affect what they do. So it's a risk when you use the blow dryer, but yeah, right there where I splattered that blue, see how the blue kind of bled right there. I mean, it's nice to have a variation of like bleed and not bleed, but ideally you want to wait for things to be dry. But I think I can just add it in these places where it is dry, and on yours, just be mindful of that. And my pink is really dry, so I might add some water to it just to loosen it up. So I'm just loading up kind of a small round brush or maybe a small flat brush would be good for this as well. And I want to look at my other example before I do this one more time. I hid it in the stack from myself. Okay. So I'm just gonna kind of float these rectangles in and then maybe I'll add some gold in the same way. So where it's dry, I'm just getting a nice thick texture to happen. And then, yeah, should be able to go over some other thick direct paint as long as it's dry, or if it's just as thick. Like if it's still wet and thick, just make sure that what you're adding is just as thick as what you're overlapping. So I would like to overlap right here because then I would get a really strong contrast between that dark blue and this pink, but I can tell it's still just a little too wet, so I'm not going to do it. But adding this wild card color, this color that's so wildly different. I mean, it's not that out there. It's a pastel pink, but it is very different from the other colors in the color scheme. It just really creates this pop and this separation. Maybe I could do some little dots of pink too, instead of those little rounded rectangular shapes. That's just adding some contrast. I want it to be a little more pink. I think I might add a little bit of red to it. Famous last words. If I make it too pink again. I feel like I'm like saying how it's such a wild card, and then I'm like, it's kind of just showing up kind of white. But that's what I mean about how these values can look so different, wet versus dry. Okay, now it's really standing out. And the other thing about the wild card thing is you have to be careful not to overdo it. Like sometimes you can be like, oh, this looks so great. Let me put a lot of it. And then it's like, nope, that was too much. So the other little caveat there is like, it's unexpected and it's minimal. Keep it pretty minimal because it's very easy to get carried away with this wild card element, and then it kind of distracts and takes away if you do too much of a good thing, right? It's like the chocolate cake icing. Too much and you start to get sick of it. And I've definitely done that. I have definitely covered entire paintings that would have been great with too many of these little floating pink shapes. And then I'm like, well, now that's what that is because I overdid it. Story of my life. Okay. Wow. Perfect timing. It's just 10 minutes here. Yeah, I would have liked it if all of that had been totally dry before I added. Oh, wait. Yeah, we still got to do maybe the graphite or something. So again, I'm gonna have to do this in the places where it's dry. So this is the mixed media aspect, is if you still feel like it's missing something and it needs something more, then taking so I've got an 8B here, so it's nice and soft graphite, and I can really only do it in the places where this is dry, but maybe a nice scribble of texture of some graphite pencil could really add another element to it. Or maybe a little line scribble like this. Or maybe you could use one of your little wild card things. Like I could do my little overlapping crescent moons. So anytime you've got one or more medias, it's mixed media. So just a little bit of some graphite scribble or some charcoal scribble makes it mixed media. I am just really pleased with how all of these turned out. It's a good reminder to myself about what happens when I really use restraint. A nice little controlled scribble here could be nice. I don't know, I'm not thrilled about how I added it there, but I'm happy with it on that one. But that's okay. We don't have to be in love with all of them. And I said one of them could be your one that you're overworking, right? But that variation in the texture of the graphite or the charcoal or maybe some pen work could really be the thing that like creates some depth if you were feeling like yours was feeling a little flat. All right. Thank you for the feedback, y'all. Thank you, Carol. So nice to see you, and Peg. Thank you. All right, let me switch to my forward facing camera, and I would love to see some of y'all's examples. So if you want to hold up your abstract studies, if they're taped down, then you peel off that tape and you'll get the nice little clean edge. If you went all the way to the edge of your tape, I'll just peel one of mine up, my favorite one here, and maybe hold it up at the end here. All right, this is Mark. Hold it up, Mark. Let's see. Yeah, all right, I like it. Oh, that one's very nice. Those are some interesting textures. Oh, that line weight that's happening in that one is really fun. Wow, you really challenged yourself going back to back on those sketchbook pages. That's always such a challenge to flip between pages like that. This is Linda. Oh, Linda, I love it. Oh, you did similar to mine, but you used some different colors. Really nice. Yeah, I love the green and blue and yellow. Exactly. Yeah, stick to those primaries and then you get that third secondary color. Okay, Sarah. Oh, wow. I love that, Sarah. That is really interesting. Yeah. It feels like circuits connected somehow. And I love all the dots and that graphite that you added. Beautiful work. All right, let's see. Oh, yes. I love how it feels like clouds floating. Yeah, I can see how you imitated some of those shapes and lines that I was doing, but used different colors. Yeah, and then that flat wash of blue in the background. This is John. Oh, yes, John. Oh, I like how you used the pink in that third quadrant, but did similar color scheme or same color scheme, but just organized it a little differently. Yes, beautiful. Yeah, make sure you tag me if y'all post any of these online. I'd love to see them. Sandra, all right. Getting a little turned around, but I see it. Yes. Beautiful work. I love all those swirls. This is John. Oh yeah. This is so fun seeing how y'all took this template and made it your own in some way. Very nice. All right, Karen. Really like those colors and textures. That's nice. Okay, and then you've got some other studies on in the sketchbook. Really fun. Yeah. Like those splatters. All right. Wow, look at those. Oh yeah, I am seeing my influence on those. That is so fun. It is just so cool to see my work like translated in this way. It's kind of a trip, y'all. It's really cool. Oh, yes, Ginger. Oh, your camera's getting away from you. Let's see. Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, okay. Oh, it's like tracking you, but it doesn't know where to go. I love the blue and the gold and the gray. Yes. And the way you made the gray thicker, that's really nice. That really created some fun separation there. Thank you all for all the wonderful feedback. I love all the comments I'm seeing. Yes, this was a really wonderful class. I'm really happy with how it turned out and all these examples. Oh, that's lovely, Barbara. Yes. Oh, I love how organic your line work is down there in that green area. I can really see you exploring your brush strokes in an interesting way. It's really great. All right, Raquel. Yeah, I love that thick blue against that washy blue. That's really fun. All right. Love the triangles, the little triangle stacks. They're great too. Oh, you have another one? Oh, went away. Doing a spotlight Raquel again. I saw you. Yes. Oh, that's fun. Yeah, I love the squares overlapping. That one got really expressive. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you all so much. Oh, this was so great. I really enjoyed it. And oh, I'm Ruth is saying first time doing abstract, used acrylic. Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I see Rich just dropped my Instagram handle in there for Sabrina that was asking. Yeah, it's definitely harder than it looks. It takes a little practice. I think the thing you got to practice the most is the restraint and also having a game plan. So, I mean, what I did tonight was very um what's the word, just like on brand. Like you can see some of my work behind me. It's like I tend to repeat the same formula quite a bit. So I just tried to stick to my formula because, like I said, sometimes I get really experimental myself and then stuff happens and I'm like, oh, well, that one's kind of a wash. But I like think everything that we do in this process is just a drop in the bucket to that practice that helps us get better. So I don't consider any abstract practice, bad practice, or, trash or anything. I hang on to all of them because I can look back at them and see, like, oh, I can, something interesting that I might want to do differently. And it's all about that restraint. So the more restraint I use, the more I tend to be happy. But then again, sometimes I push it to the edge where it's like destroyed, like take it to the brink of destruction and then bring it back from there. But that's for another class. Okay, so next week, drawing teeth, and I hope to see you all then. Thank you all so much. And don't forget to tag your work with those hashtags, make it with Michael's or Michael's classes. And I'll see you next time. Have a great night.